Hey guys, how's it going? This is Peter Han. I want to welcome you to a new video. I want to introduce to you a new prop that I just got in the mail, and I want to show you how we can use things like this to help further our understanding of observational drawing. This particular prop comes from a company called Kaiyodo, and it was sculpted and produced by this particular Japanese artist, Shinobu Matsumura. And if you look at the back side of it, as you can see, this is actually a little figurine of a insect. And this is an Asian Giant Hornet, and it's pretty articulated, has a good sense of motion. I've already kind of opened up the package, put it together, so there's no point in me opening this up. It's empty at the moment, but it does have actually some pretty nice packaging. It does have some information about the stuff, things in English as well too, and they do have variations in which it comes in. They offer the Giant Hornet, the Emperor Scorpion, and also a small crab. Had a nice little overlapping packaging. The cover of it was kind of interesting. I wasn't really quite sure what this was about, but the prop itself, the little figure, is actually quite fantastic. Now, of course, I've been doing a couple of small videos here showing things like demos and drawings of insect forms. So this actually kind of lined up well. I wasn't intending this to be used as a drawing prop. I just find these things fascinating. I'm a collector of toys and figures, and I just thought this was actually really well put together in terms of accuracy and quality. So I finally got it, and let me bring it over here into the camera. And I put it together. It's actually quite nice. As you can see, the scale is quite large. Wings do articulate and move around. It actually will come with extra set of wings. The mandibles even open and close. The antennas will actually even flex. The limbs do have two joint sections at the base of the thorax and at one of the joints here. At the foot, this is stationary. The head obviously will swivel, move around. The abdomen area will also flex and move, and it's segmented, which can also then be articulated in itself. The bottom end of it, which is the stinger section, will actually pop off with a magnet, and with this you can actually flip it up and retract the stinger and put it back together. And this is standing on the plastic base right here, which you can put it in a position for flight. So I'm going to be using this and as a drawing reference, and I do like it quite a bit because of its accuracy. The scale is fantastic for the details. Obviously I can get really close into this. There are some cheaper alternatives to small figurines for animal structures, bone structures, and of course even things like insect forms. I found a couple here on Amazon. I have one of a Hercules beetle, which cost around, I would say, $50 US at the time when it came out. It's a little bit more expensive today. This particular piece, being more of a collector, was about $100. So I don't expect, nor would I even recommend people just to pick one up, because obviously the price range may not be suitable for most, average collectors or people that are not really interested in using these as drawing formats. Using photo references may be more than enough. So I'm not going to say go out there and buy these kind of things, but if you are a collector and if you are interested in this kind of stuff, it is a great part of a shelf as a shelf sitter. And of course, if you want to use it for further application, you could. So for me, I found it to be interesting, but I definitely wanted to include this extra application of being able to just observe it and look at it from different angles of views. Now, granted, I do have a lot of actual insects, dead ones, and I showed you guys one in the previous video. And looking at the real insects obviously has a huge benefit because of the fact that the texture, the individual details, all those things are fantastic. But the scaled up version of it gives you a little bit cleaner approach. It's not going to be the exact details of things like the hairs and small little things. Of course, it is designed to be a figure, and so there are some liberties that come into play here. But it does, like I said, produce a nice example for us to be able to use just for observational drawing. So I'm going to use this one off to the side for the moment and just trying to start sketching and talking about the benefit and the use of models like this, and why I want to continue gathering them for my collection. Not just because of the visual and because I like to collect figures, but also in terms of how I'm going to use it for the sketching. I'm going to put it off to the side, and it won't be on camera. Maybe I'll bring it up a little bit later on. And let's zoom in a little bit. We are going to be using just a felt tip pen. This is from the review for the previous video of the Euchre's brand. I'm using the kind of a rag tooth paper. This is the one that was handmade. We'll be probably bringing a bit of watercolor in here as well too. So let's go into the sketch over here. And the first and foremost of the thing that I want to go for, actually before I even put off to the side, what I do want to understand is that as I look at this actual object, obviously I will interact with it. I'll look at it from different angles of views. I'll even then pose it in ways that I want to. So the beauty of this particular piece compared to, let's say, the dead examples of insects is that I can't really move it afterwards when it's set and dried out and present it in the box. But here with this figurine, I can definitely put it in different positions. That's going to be more appropriate to, let's say, a shot of angle, pose of action, and of course for use of camera and whatnot. It does give me a lot more versatility as a model. So that's one of the big benefits of pieces like this to go for. In actuality, some of these pieces can also be then extracted. You can take them apart from the joints to the abdomen. I wouldn't necessarily recommend on parts that don't really show it in the manual. Like some parts here can be taken off and replaced. But the legs I know can be taken apart as well too, because it does come with extra joints. So the great thing about that is I can do explosive views, take things apart and really get a good sense of the volume of the form. So here I'm going to start with, let's say, a side view here. With a smaller insect, typically going from the top view can be great, but here, because it's larger of an example, side view is going to be awesome. So it gives me the head, thorax, and abdomen, 3 different sections which I can interpret then what the forms are. Using segmentation, I can then also layer and create sense of volume with the cross contour as I turn it in different angles of views. So yeah, let's set this aside. I've actually set it up in a way that's more going to be a side view section. So the first thing I want to do is to establish the location of where things are going to go for the drawing. So the blank piece of paper that I have right now, I do want to be mindful of like where things are just going to go. For most people, as they treat a sketchbook page like this, they tend to kind of find empty space and they just start drawing. And I used to do this a lot also with sketchbooks as well. And so then you start to get kind of irregular spacing. It's more just based on then whatever space is left over, you just occupy it with an idea, a sketch, and you just want to make it look good. Now, I do want to plan out things on where they're going to go. And typically in a sketch page, I think about things in blocks of 3s. And so the blocks can represent different intentions of sketching. I can have a horizontal block up here. I can have a secondary block right there. I can have a third block over here. Or I can go first block vertical down this direction, second block going horizontal that way, third block coming down this direction. Let's do that actually. Let's go vertical down this direction here. The intention for the first block is for numerous sets of side views to progress and also understand better a proportion of this hornet. Second block is going to go into other examples of things like maybe a head study or a call out of something, possibly a different angle of view as I rotate the model next to me. The third block will go into a little bit more details. I'll probably put it in a position that I like, and I might even just watercolor that one too. So I've visually in my head projected like where things are going to go. Now, if you're kind of starting off and learning to just block and lay out pages like this and you have a hard time controlling it, you can use a marker, just kind of lay down lines as to where you want certain sections to go. This really maximizes the use of your page, and you're able to then keep control as to what your intentions are per section. So let's do our first study off to the side. First thing I want to do is just establish a line. This will help me set the scale of the drawing. Again, it's going to fit within this first block vertically down here. So the first thing I want to do is use a certain shape, 2-dimensional, and just block down things like the head, thorax, abdomen section. And this is just my first impression. What I think these shapes could be used to represent the proportions of the animal. Here's a back end of the abdomen. This at the moment may not be necessarily the best shapes to use, but it's my first impression. And from there, as I do multiple iterations, I may alter and change that. And it comes forward this direction. Legs are connected here, here, and back over here. Leg comes down this direction using just lines, not really worrying about shape within the limbs. I'm just allocating where the legs are placed and connected to the anatomy of the body parts. Let's taper out the front section of the head to the mandible. Let's throw in some lines that divide out sections of the abdomen. I can even count it out. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 sections. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 sections here. So this is a side flat 2-dimensional view. And typically, again, a side view, front view, top view for orthographic is going to be the best. This is my first interpretation. We're going to stop there because I got enough as to what I need to have for the shapes. I'm going to do another interpretation below that. So let's repeat the process this time, but I'm going to adjust a couple things. First thing foremost, let's draw that line again. But I want to curve in the abdomen a bit more because it has a bit more of a curvature inwardly down this direction. The wings I've also repositioned differently. I can actually do this in the model right now next to me. I can actually move the wings in a better positioning because the wings on the figurine was coming towards the camera. It wasn't easy to draw, so I'm going to put it to the side. So let's go back into the head and mark things off. Here's a head section, thorax section, abdomen section, but this time I'm going to alter the shape. I used a circular shape before, but this time I'm going to use a geometric shape just to get a sense of like how I would build this, 2 dimensions, but to get a good sense of the proportion. And same thing even on the abdomen. Let's block it out. Even though there's curvature, I want to draw in with geometry because I can then control the structure a little bit easier. Again, the wings are going to come to the side using just a simple shape. From here, let's also indicate connections as to where the legs go to the thorax. Same deal. Let's come to the legs, just drawing a line. Back legs. Now, you don't have to necessarily have as complex of a structure of a figurine as this, and as beneficial as it is because of its accuracy. Again, you can get small little toy figurines, the plastic little kind of like ones that you'll see as packaging of things. And they're nice just to have something visual to kind of hold in hand and move around. And so the benefit, of course, of having a physical model is to be able to see it from multiple different angles of views. Drawing animals like this live, of course, would be difficult to actually get because, for one, it's not readily available. 2, if you do see one, it's going to move around all over the place. So even if you had it in an enclosure, in some kind of encasing, again, to analyze that and capture it from a certain angle of view, like a side, it may not hold still for you. So then, of course, looking at things within photographs are typically the normal route as to what most people go to. Then, of course, going into things like this really helps a lot as well. In this iteration, I'm actually using now shapes and forms. The form now has 3 dimensions in the legs. And I'm actually placing in things like cross contours, sections and pieces, down to the foot. I'm just adding a little bit more information to this drawing. Not as much as the first one, but just enough. So I feel like in this iteration, it's still a little bit compact. I feel like it could be just stretched out a little bit wider. Let's do one more iteration at the bottom, but this time I don't want to invest fully into the drawing. I just want to do a recorrection because I want to say, you know what, I think this can go out a little bit further, that direction, turn that way. I think the head position's okay, legs are fine too, but they can also space out more that direction. So right now I'm just taking mental notes with arrows to kind of figure out what I want to adjust. But instead of just stopping there and trying a different angle of view, when you guys sketch and draw, when you find certain issues, solve them. Problem solve them and do it again. And doesn't mean that you have to recreate the entire thing to one-to-one. Even if you just want to do a smaller study, just to answer some of those small little dilemmas and issues. So let's lengthen out the body. Let's get into the thorax. Let's get to the abdomen, but this time again, it's going to be just a little bit longer. I like the circular shape on the head. When I add that geometry to the front, let's get to the wings again. This time I'm just going to use a line just to get the sense of the angle. From here, the legs are forward set, but the 2 back legs are closer together like this. These are all very equally placed out, but it has a different kind of like proportional connections to the limbs. It's more like this based on observation. And this time I'm not really going to create shapes for the legs. I just want to, again, draw them in there with lines. But this now gives me something a little bit more accurate to what I'm seeing, and I feel better about it. It's not a more detailed drawing, but I feel like in terms of proportion of the length, height from the ground as to where it's sitting, to the location of the limb connections, this feels much more accurate to me. So I can feel more confirmation to it, and now I can move on, okay? So the idea is that this is a stage for you to get more familiar. You go through multiple repetitions to understand things. Let's go to the top row, which is going to be a horizontal right here. And I'm going to move and alter the figurine and turn it in a position. Okay. What this could be is also a study prior to the bigger iteration, but I might even do some other small things. But let's do that. Let's actually do a head call out. Let's actually put it in a different position. Nope. And we're going to go into the head. So what I'm seeing at the moment, I'm going to bring it to the camera. I'm drawing it from this angle of view. This angle of view right there. Let's bring in the head structure. And the first thing I want to do is do the first study with the idea of my first impression of the shape. And then before I move forward, let's continue to zoom in a little bit more. And so that way you can kind of analyze and focus on the specific details here. And the first impression is just to use a circle to represent the scale and the size of the drawing. Then let's also use cross lines to represent the location of where the eyes are going to be placed down to the front plate of the head structure. I'm going to also now cut into the shape and the form, giving a sense of more 3 dimensions by wrapping on the edges, cross contour. Let's go into the mandible structures on the side here. Those are going to be, again, separate geometry that I'm adding now into. So the addition is now being placed in. We have addition, and we can also do things like subtractions as well. Let's go into the location of the eye. So let's cut that shape into it. Very aggressive looking face, obviously with wasps. We see these very angular lines, very sharp areas. This is the location of where the antenna connection is placed in. There and there. The antenna is coming towards the camera, but I'm going to move and alter it so it goes off to the side like this. Here's the other antenna, goes up in that direction. These don't have very specific details just yet, but I can start to now cut more into this to get some nuances about the head of the animal. But let's just take it to a certain point, and once I get this separate panel line within the exoskeleton of the animal, I'm not going to put heavy amount of information of details just yet. We'll just even use the lines of the antenna and leave it at that for the moment. Well, let's move on and do another iteration. Again, this is just one example of how I could approach it, which was a circle and a cross to find the overall shape and the form as it turns. Let's do another iteration though. This time what I'm going to do is block it out. Let's use a box for a top plane and cross that over to the other side. Let's use a side plane here. Let's take it to the front section of a plane of the form. Move it back a little bit. Here we have the geometry of the plane's top, front, sides, tapering angles, interconnections, and from there, same kind of deal. I'm going to now indicate location of where the eyes are going to be placed into that form. There's a lot of volume on the side of the head over here. Cross contour, turn that direction. There's an in cut of the exoskeleton in the eye, compound eye in that direction. The antennas are going to connect here and here, going down into the front plate. This not front plate, but the top plate, that is, of the exoskeleton of the insect head. Mandibles again are now going to squeeze into this area. Notice this was an addition. This is now actually going into the overall silhouette. 2 different approaches. It doesn't mean one is right and one is wrong. These are just 2 different ways of looking at it. So the more you experiment like this, you start to find your efficient process and the one that makes the most sense to you. And you're able to make a choice and stick with it. And it harbors then a stronger connection to this discovery. And you're able to then replicate that same effect using potentially other insects or other forms, or if anything else, the right proper mindset towards other kinds of drawings that you'll do for different subject matter, which is the idea of being able to block in simplistic geo or organic forms, being able to construct and draw through. Let's actually bring the antennas up, forward direction, back over here. And again, we don't necessarily need to have to place in a heavy amount of detail. This is more about studies of being able to dissect and break down some individual parts that I wanted to study, the head being a very interesting part. So I'm letting my curiosity and interest also let me gravitate to certain areas. Do you have to do a head study? Of course not. I could have studied the thorax, I could have studied the leg structure, I could have studied a different part of the animal. But obviously the head is a very interesting part for most people when it comes to animals. And so I invested a little bit of time to figure that part out. Block number 2. So right now at the moment, again, we're not heavily rendering things. We are detailing some stuff and we're constructing very much. But right now we have block number 1, block number 2. Now block number 3 is open for us. So again, I'm able to group together and tie things. And now I'm going to invest a bit of time right here as I put it into a pose, which I actually like the pose that it's in right now. I'm going to turn it just a bit more. And I'm going to do a quick thumbnail study off to the side. Always doing a small thumbnail is recommended. So over here, let's do a small thumbnail of the pose. Here's the head structure, a line. Thorax is going to go there. And the thumbnail is to help us become more familiar to the subject matter, to make some decisions and also then mistakes that we can then either avoid or solve out better in the next iteration. The wings are going to come up this direction, go out that way. It's going to overlap underneath this head structure using just basic 2D shapes to represent the wings. And it comes up like that. Here, connection to a leg, to the back end of the thorax, down and forward, up and over. Mid leg goes up, down and across. Back leg is overlapping on top of the abdomen as it comes down this direction. Other leg in the midpoint, I can't see it. The way it's raised is in a different position. If I wanted to change that, I can go into the model and do so. But I'll leave it as it is for now. And this is just to help me get, again, like I said, familiar to its posing. So I feel pretty good about that right now. So now I want to go into this area and section that's open at the moment here. And let's plug in another study, but this time let's go a little bit larger. And out of these two, the head studies, I want to start to kind of pick and choose the parts that I like about it. Whether it's a geometry thing, whether it's an organically round thing, how I then indicated the cross contours, or constructed the geometry of the form. Let's go in there and kind of like blend some elements. I like the circular approach because it establishes the scale of the drawing. After this circle, I can now picture where things end, where the legs will be kind of positioned, where the wings are going to go. So I'm able to kind of allocate the scale and size of this thing. Once I do that, let's place in a line. I'm going to go this direction to the abdomen, which goes underneath here. I want to also just kind of lock in placement of the wings, going up that way, going up that way. And I'm going to blur these wings out to make it feel like they're kind of flapping. So let's go into the thorax. Block this out in this section. Contour. Go into the abdomen. Blocking out this structure. Very lightly at first. Not paying too much mind to like the strict control of line just yet, but just making sure I feel confident as to where things are being placed. Front pair of legs are going to be right there. Second pair into the back section. Let's go back into the head and just continue to build out a little bit more information. Top plane with side plane on top of the circle. Let's go into the mandible. I like the addition aspect of it. Why? In a certain situation, I just felt like it was more comfortable. It's all very personal in terms of your choices as to how you want to go about constructing these things. Let's go into the eye section right there. You have these kind of like segmented lines, which the antenna is going to come up and over underneath the secondary or the first drawing study. Go into the limbs, bring it up and forward to the camera. This one's also going to go up and cross down. Let's use some lines to interconnect some of the joints to see the right placements of things. Let's go to the mid legs. They're going to come up, overlapping this section of the abdomen, drawing lines to find out placements as it extends past the abdomen area of the overlap. Back end legs, using lines just to figure out placement. Joints down, the leg is behind it, kind of lines up right in between this section of the negative area. Stinger down here. So now I have a larger iteration of this piece at the moment. So my sketchbook at the moment for the study of, let's say, 20 minutes or so, I filled up quite a bit. I'm able to keep moving because I know what these are supposed to do as a finish level. These are finished sketches. Most people think of finish as being a render or overly detailed control drawing because there's more information, it looks more realistic, or possibly matches closer to your referencing. I understand how most people want to view their sketches or drawings or illustrations, but based on study-based drawings, these are just as equally finished as something that has a lot of information because my intention was clearly placed in. My intention for the first block was to understand the side view proportion. I knew I wasn't going to take it any further. That was my ending point. That's a finished drawing because my clear intention of communication is there. These are two head studies. I wanted to analyze proportion, the volume of the form, cross contour in 3 dimensions, draw through. It wasn't about rendering. I wanted to include details. I knew where to end at that point. My intention for this sketch is to take it further. I want to include more details. I want to find an area of focus. I want to intensify my contrast and hatching, and I'm going to drop in a couple of bit of watercolor. So there's a lot more to do here. This is not done yet, okay? So I can keep going now. Let's keep moving forward and establish things like the wing. I'm going to draw in a shape of the wing, but I'm going to blur it. Blur the wing. So this will give you the sense of like it's in motion. And this is a way to solve it because I know the wing can extend out of it, but as it gets to the edges, it can soften up and blur and almost dissipate and disappear on the edges. And this is a way to kind of help me place in and lock down where things go. From here, let's kind of now refine some of the details and go back to the beginning. I'm going to go into the antennas, which is the top layer. Let's build out these shapes and forms. Forms will be then communicated through the use of the cross contour. Wraps around the antenna. Those segmentation lines do exist as I separate the plates of the exoskeleton on the head, as we had studied from the previous iteration. Starting to get a bit more density and also pressure on top of the line. And just going back in and refining some of these shapes. So the underlay drawing, which will always be there, becomes less, I guess, obtrusive as I continue to now reinforce stronger lines. That constructive stuff can be there if you want to see or find it, but it can be disguised with all this heavier information. Let's go into the mid-thorax. Now there's a lot of segmentation of body parts play, so I'm going to just continue to break these parts down into geometry. Let's go into the limbs of the lower part here. Let's bring it forward to the camera. Down into limbs. And again, I didn't necessarily intend to do another demo of an insect, but it just happened to work out where this model just came in today. And again, I could have been drawing anything, but the fact of the matter is that I also like drawing bugs. Even though I've already done one before, I have no mind of just wanting to do another one as a study. Especially as a giant hornet like this one, it looks really cool. I think the figure was excellent in terms of quality. It's super accurate in terms of proportion. I love the paint job on top of that. It feels very, very almost custom in a lot of ways. All right, so let's go to the midpoint of the legs, the section, volume of the independent limb structures with the cross contour. The lines are not going to be parallel for the individual limbs. You will notice some things curve a little bit, and they also taper from thin to thick. Thin to thick. So going too parallel makes it feel very flat. So I want to actually even do things like this. So it creates a little bit more of a visually dynamic form, but it's more accurate to the anatomy of the animal itself as well too. We play with straights and curves, much like drawing the figure, and we can do that with animals here as well. And it works for insect forms, it works for mammals, it works for reptiles, straight and curves. Let's go into this abdomen section. Actually, before I do so, let's actually get the back pair of legs in place, as we're now overlapping, as we're going top, underneath, layering the structures. This has a very kind of almost logical method of thinking and drawing. It can have a lot of downsides, which of course makes drawing sometimes feel a little bit static. So the best thing to do, of course, is just bring in things like gesture, line of flow of the actual line itself, and of course of the gesture of the physical subject. Movement-based things, posing, whatever the case, to bring in some more energy. So I'm going to do that here with the top pair of the wings. Just a silhouette of the back leg. Let's bring in the abdomen below. Have these sections being broken down. Large stinger underneath it. So here with the wings underlay overlap, as it's closest to the connection, I want to keep these lines straight and focus to the silhouette. As it gets to the edges of things, what I can now do is also throw in things like hatching to blur the effect of the wing motion. Even up here on the top. So the hatching will now break the silhouette as it gets to the edge of the form, or the shape that is, of the wing. It becomes a bit more abstracted. This is just the first layer. Let's go to the other side. Notice it's mostly on the silhouette at the moment. Internally, I can kind of show some variances of what's happening inside with the vein work of the insect wings. As it gets to the closest area of section, it's a bit more clear. Internally is where I can now start to break it up. Now this line is very light, very faint. So I might go back in there and reinforce it with a heavier line eventually. But for the moment, we have a sense of movement going on, generally. So what I want to do now is switch up the pens. I'm going to bring in my Pigma FB pens. This has a slight brush pen going into it. And I'm going to use this to kind of reinforce some line weight. This is also a waterproof ink. The felt tip pen I was using right now also has a waterproof ink inside of it, inside the converter. So if I bring in some of the watercolor here, it'll work just fine. So inside the eye is a very dark value. There's a strong highlight on it. The underside of the line below the insect is where I'm reinforcing some heavy line weights. I'm not putting line weight all the way throughout, okay? Putting it underside. Why? Because I can say a general sense of light is coming from the top. So I can contrast that with the line weight below it. And when it comes to your line weights, it's good to also experiment in terms of how far you push it in terms of the weight. How heavy do you go with the line weight? As I move away from the form, it'll get thinner and more tapered. I don't want to reinforce the line weight equally through the entire drawing. I want to actually push the focus within this area centered towards the head, thorax, a little bit of the abdomen. What I can also do now is because a lot of the animal in between the shadows at the thorax is quite dark, I just want to show a couple of small spots, but I'm also going to be using the watercolor to drop in some of the value control. But I will use the pen and the ink to show a higher contrast. The back leg is also in shadow, so I'm going to actually drop that in very heavily here. That shadow. The back leg also behind it is all in shadow, so I'll drop that just dark. And do a little bit of hatching just to show some changes within the value and not just filling everything just pitch black dark. With the wings now, I'm going to start to show a bit more intensity of line weight, a bit more blending, breaking the edges further, making it feel a bit more aesthetic. You can turn and rotate the page as much as you want to, obviously to find the best angle. Over here, again, same thing. And again, just going back and adjusting lines, making them a little bit more intense in the inside. So we get that flap going on right now. Inside the legs over here, same kind of deal. I just want to push that weight interior with indications of shadows. On the abdomen sections, there are patterns. So with the patterns, I can just kind of draw them in lightly, graphically. Here on the antennas, just a little bit of information. This particular drawing will now command a lot more attention. I can do a couple of small little studies on this side as well. So now that I have everything kind of in place, I will be moving into the watercolor here very, very soon. I'm just going to make a couple of small little lines to help separate some areas that might have a little bit of shadow increase, just to help even organize where I want to place stuff for the watercolor stuff. But from here, again, the focal point is towards the front. A couple of small indents where segmentation or certain crevices might have deep pockets. Placing even just kind of notes off to the side can help occupy spacing. So I can just kind of name the insect off to the side here. So this is the Asian Giant Hornet. Any additional notes on the bottom you can include, and I'll kind of fill that in afterwards, but for the moment all the visuals and the drawings are kind of like where I want them to be. So as an overall study of one particular model or animal here, there's a good amount of information right now. So the single drawing doesn't just sell it. The overall package of the page is what really communicates what's going on right now. Let's put this down, and I'm going to actually go back to just the flesh of this backing of the sketchbook. It has a little bit more rise. I'm going to grab my watercolors, and we'll begin again. All right, so for the watercolor, what I'm going to be using at the moment is my main tool set, which is the Schmink brand watercolor. This is a large palette of color sets, which I customized by selecting the colors that I wanted. I'm going to be using a water brush, which is essentially an empty brush that has a cavity inside the handle that you can fill it with water. You can then squeeze it and it drips water out, which you can then self-clean using just a paper towel. So looking at the model, I can see obviously the color sets, pretty straightforward, very simplistic. Using the watercolors that I have right now, even some of the colors that are just kind of already on there, I can just kind of select from. I feel like they're going to match pretty well to what I'm seeing. Going back and just kind of selecting a bit more watercolors. So I'm not really going to just like clean the palette or anything like that. We'll just use what is here. So especially when I'm on the go and I'm drawing on location, I'm using watercolors, I tend to be, again, like I said, pretty just loose about it. And then we'll start to kind of like place in general washes. I'm not going to just fill it in. I'm considering the light of the paper underneath, where I'm seeing some light sources on the edge of the form. Now, because of this rag paper, it actually is picking up some of the ink. So what I can do now here in this situation is use my heat gun, which I can then kind of blast in there. It'll dry things out. Typically, of course, you wouldn't have any kind of dryer on location at a museum or something like this. But granted, you know, the kind of sketchbooks you would take with you, you know, you consider what you'd be using and it would have a different effect. This is a very absorbent paper. So I kind of use this for my own personal kind of studies. And if I did use this, I'd probably use a different kind of ink. This one in particular is not the one that's going to bleed. It's actually the one from the felt tip pen with the fountain pen ink that's inside of it. So that is a very kind of like heavy pigmented saturated ink that will absorb into the paper. And even though it'll dry out, with water, it'll activate it, even though it's a water resistant ink. But in that situation, the only thing you can do is just to wait it out. Let it sit, let it dry out. You can take some photographs, draw something else, come back to it when it dries out completely, and then paint on top of that. Now that I kind of hit it with the heat gun, it has less of the ink being picked up and being moved around. Let's go into the back end of the abdomen. Again, the focus is going to be right over here. I'm not going to paint the entire thing in, but I do want to indicate on the back of the abdomen that this color does exist on the animal. And as I get out of the focal point, and the focal point is there for us to become more efficient, so that we don't have to render and sit and basically complete the entire sketch, because a sketch as an interpretation, or at least as a study, needs just enough information for the viewer to know what I'm trying to communicate to them based on what I see and based on what I want to actually communicate. So let's go into a little bit of the color of the eye. I'm just going to use some of the color around it here on the palette. This is kind of a combination of a burgundy to magenta. That should be a fine enough color for the inside of the eye. I'm looking at the figure in the model and responding to it, but you don't always have to just go by what you see. You can play with color in ways you just want to. Yes, there's a logic that comes into mind, it's like this wasp is yellow and black. But again, there's a lot of other colors coming into play. I see some like hints of like red and pinks. There's a little bit of cool on the edge of the mandible right there. Even the antenna goes dark value, but again, those kind of darker values can be something else. But we'll play with it just a little bit. But this, sketch is not large enough to get a lot of variation of what's going on. So I'm just doing some general fill. So I don't want to be overly too experimental. It's just, again, like I said, a really quick study. I do like those small little hints of red or pinks inside the yellow, which is going to be right on the abdomen, right there, right on the edges over here where the segmentation is. Kind of drop in a little bit of that. The camera is picking up some of the shine of the water, so it should start to be more visible when that dries out a little bit. Of course, the thorax is much darker value, so I will be using, this is kind of basically, it's a cool gray. It's very blue, but it's not like super saturated. It's kind of more on the ultramarine side. That's darkened up quite a bit. I don't remember the exact name of this paint, but it is cool on the cool side, and is a very darker value. When I fill this in with that area, I have an indication of where light is hitting on the thorax. I'm going to use water to just fill these areas in. I'm just kind of moving the paint around. It feeds into the wing a little bit. Going into the legs, I see a mixture between this kind of darker, cool value to some of the slight shifts of brown. And I'm going to use more like a burnt sienna in certain areas. That's kind of diluted with this cool dark. Now with this watercolor as being sitting on top of this paper, which is very absorbent, it will shift in value and saturation quite a bit. The color that you put down will definitely not be exactly what you get. So working back into it, readjusting it constantly will always be needed. But be patient with it, have fun with the process. And as you experiment with the paint and try some other things, you'll see what results you come out from this. And from there, you're able to potentially just start, sorry for that noise, be able to actually get the direct result that you want to go for. Let's go for some of the actual striping. Again, this is not as, it's not the same value. It's much darker in this area, but I'm building up to that value. Again, outside the focal point area, which is this, focal point is inside here. Outside of it, I'm letting it kind of fade off. I will fill a little bit in there, but the contrast will be light. Saturation won't be as intense. I do a general kind of fill. Let's go back into the wings, which is going to have a little bit more, a little bit of a yellow ochre in there. And it kind of goes in. We'll keep kind of layering some colors inside the wing area. I'm bringing a bit more of that yellow ochre in here. Other side of the wing, start to see a bit of that yellow again. It's not really yellow, it's yellow ochre, so not as saturated as some of the areas that I want to go for inside the body. Kind of drop that in there. Again, it's pretty light value right now in the thorax. I'm going to intensify that a bit more. Bringing in that kind of cool. I'm going to mix it with the burnt umber. The kind of the burnt umber color right here. Mix it in with this cool area section and it darkens that value. I can make it more warm with the burnt umber. Or I can make it more cool with this. It's kind of like a darker, almost like ultramarine in a lot of ways. But now this is where I can kind of intensify the values. Our shadows. Start to blend a few things. Using a bit of water now to kind of move it around. I'm just kind of layering this watercolor as I go. And because it's been a transparent medium, it can definitely take a lot of layers to get to an effect that you really want to go for. Here's some of the vein work in the wings as it goes out. And just a slight amount of paint going in there. And bringing in that saturation of that yellow. This is more like a lemon yellow. Going into, back into this area, just kind of kicking up a bit more of that saturation. And there's a little hint of these kind of like yellow portions inside the leg. Just kind of, again, using that transparency effect, just kind of layering some of that color inside there. Not a heavy punch, but it kind of shows you, again, hints of that going around. Going back into the antenna, just darkening that front antenna up a little bit. Down to the limbs and into the feet, which is going to be a much darker value. I'm going to fill that up as a grade into portion. So as you can see, a lot of the kind of contrast, saturation is being kept right up here into the head. A lot of this stuff back here, I'm not even going to touch anymore. It's very light in contrast. I want to leave it as it is. It has a much heavier read to the front, as it even actually has depth as it goes back in space now. And to be quite honest, there's not really much else I need to do here. So watercolors can be quick, just a fast wash of color like this one here will give it enough of a read and fun factor to it. And moving the paint around and letting it kind of bleed into the paper, the texture. It does warp a little bit, but not that much, honestly, as you can see. Because of the heavy rag, it absorbs it like a paper towel, but it doesn't buckle way heavily. So I do like this paper because of that. And this is, again, more of a hand-bound, handcrafted paper. Very heavy rag to it. It's not toothy, per se. It has a lot of fiber in it. Fibrous in terms of the actual material of the paper itself. But it's definitely a lot of fun to draw on. It handles the ink really well. It doesn't bleed, especially using felt tip pens and stuff like that. And of course, the watercolor reacts really nicely to it, especially if you work slowly. If you work overly fast, it will start to pick up the fibers and start to kind of roll them a little bit, and it can tear the surface of the paper. So be careful of pressing too hard also. It's better to keep it light, simple. Okay, so that's about as much watercolor as I need. We'll put this away for the moment. We'll come back in with the pen, and what I want to do is just a couple of small little adjustments, maybe some certain detail callouts. With the felt tip pen now, I can go in there and just kind of like mark some things, push some contrast, or if it's going to be some edge details, a cleanup, possibly even things like line weight push more, just kind of in certain areas that I feel like it's a bit too weak. I might just slightly clean things up on the edges. I did that with the pigment brush initially, but this one here with the felt tip pen can give me a little bit more finer control. The head section right there. So we have a pretty good overall study right now. This is the Asian Giant Hornet. Here was the model that we were using off to the side. See the connection to it visually. Again, as a reminder, this is a figure that was made by a company, Kaiyodo, sorry. So let's put that down. Figure by Kaiyodo. So putting down like notes of information. This is a thumbnail. Just helping us understand where we're going. This is study 1, study 2, heads, side views over here, proportion. So then your sketch page feels very, very intentional in terms of presentation and layout. And we did a very simple thing of just kind of making sure we understand what area of blockage we're kind of going into. That shows us a control as to what we're trying to attempt, whether it's a simple side view, some head study callouts, a third block section for more detail, and also some color indication, some note taking, some variations about how we're approaching the shape and the forms. And we start to get, again, a page that feels very, very almost, well, it was very intentional. And it works out pretty well. So just as a reminder, we are using the little figure produced by Kaiyodo. It was produced by an artist named Shinobu Matsumura. And this is available through different stores. I found it on bigbadtoystore.com. And it is quite pricey. So again, I don't necessarily say I would recommend buying something like this because of course photographs and references like that are going to be more than enough for most people. But if you like having something on hand to be able to move around different positions, obviously this is posable. You can actually articulate it quite a bit. And it's really fun to be able to kind of put it in positions you want to go for. The mandibles can close and open again. And just to kind of show you guys real quickly at the end of this video to show you how much of this can really move for people that are just kind of joining in right now. And again, this can be taken off the stand. You can really kind of have it on hand, put it on the ground plane. Again, this can curl quite dramatically. And it's quite sturdy. It holds the positions really well. So you can probably even like animate with this, like with stop motion, and get some really nice results. Here's the other leg. But definitely a fantastic piece, which I would highly recommend for people that are interested in looking for high quality figures. If it's within your price range and budget, of course, I would say this is a good pickup. They do have other examples. They have an Emperor Scorpion and a crab. This one I bought because I thought the example of it was such a beautiful piece. And I was interested in more of the wasp anyways. I wouldn't mind seeing the scorpion at some point. The crab was also really nice too. I would like to see even more examples come out from them. Whether they go into things like beetles or whatnot. Other kinds of like isopods and arthropods were really fun. But in any case, I'm going to keep an eye out for this from this company to see whatever they produce. Here's a demo using a figure in a model such as like this, and how it can be very beneficial in your observational studies. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and look for more videos in the future for demo processes, maybe not any more insects. If I'm interested, I will definitely do so, if I have a different kind of examples and mock-ups. But hopefully next time, we'll try something also different. The new book I'll be producing will be announced very shortly, so I'll also be using that in conjunction for further demos as well, just to help promote and market, and hopefully for you guys' interest and curiosity. So thank you again for your time, and thank you guys for stopping by for Peter Han Style demos over here. And of course, you can look for more information on my feed on Instagram on Peter Han Style again. But if you haven't subscribed or bookmarked this channel and feed, to just kind of check back once in a while. I try to post a video once every other week or so. And of course, I would try to jump onto more of live streams on Twitch, which you can find under the same handle as well. So thank you guys again. Have a good night, and I'll see you guys next time.